We're joined today by Senator Lisa Boscola, who's the Democratic chair of the Senate Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure Committee. You're sponsoring efforts to renew a policy that provides safeguards during the utility shutoff process, also known as Chapter 14. Can you explain for us what your proposal would do?
Senate Bill 154, it was passed out of the Senate recently. In fact, out of the committee came out 14-0 and then went to appropriations. We had 3 negative votes in appropriations and then went to the full floor for a vote, and that floor vote was 41-7. And we can get into why there were some negative votes. But what Senate Bill 154 does is Chapter 14. And for people that don't understand what Chapter 14 means, the public doesn't really. It's the Responsible Utility Customer Protection Act. And we instituted it in 2004 originally. It originated because some of the utility companies were having significant problems with how to collect bills from people that weren't paying, right? And the PUC at the time, the Public Utility Commission, was granting customers anywhere from 25 to 50 to 75 years to pay off utility debt. So something was going wrong, because if you can't pay off your debt, then paying customers have to pay their debt. And so it was PGW that was really signaling that something needed to be done legislatively. So we started Chapter 14 in 2004, and then had an expiration date, right, of 10 years. So it was sunset. And there, we put some protections in to make sure that individuals that couldn't pay, really struggling families, that you couldn't just shut them off in the wintertime, right, from their utility bills. But we also gave some payment plans and some structure on how you're going to be able to pay off your debt. And if we can get into a payment plan and get the EDCs, the electric distribution companies, to try to help with payment plans. Because if we don't get people paying their bills, and other people that are paying their bills have to pay for those that aren't paying. And I just recently found out I'm from the Lehigh Valley in PPL territory. They were saying that our customers are paying about $150 more in their utility bill, because we're paying for people that aren't paying their bills. So we want that balance between how do we get really struggling families to pay their bills, get them on some payment plans, something that they can afford. We don't want to shut them off in the wintertime, of course. And then how do we, balance that with making sure that there are customers up there that kind of refuse to pay. They're out there, and we had to be tough on them. So it was that balance. And then 10 years after that, we renewed Chapter 14 again and put some more protections in for consumers, but also the utility companies needed some added reassurances. And then here we are today. So it's 20 years after the first inception of Chapter 14. And it's been a struggle, in the legislature, because you have consumers on one end demanding more and more protections, and then you have the utilities saying, wait a minute, we can't afford all this. And that's where we're trying to strike that balance, and where Senate Bill 154 did pass. It did so with some negative votes, more on the more liberal side of the Democratic Party, because they wanted more protections for consumers. So we're at where we are today, but we're in a good position because it passed pretty well out of the Senate, and the House now has to take it up. The House leadership has changed. The chairman that I'm used to dealing with is now different, and just hired an executive director who's getting up to speed on all of these issues, and seems really knowledgeable at this point. So we're trying to work with them. And I allowed Senator Spano and I, he's the Republican minority chair of this committee. Him and I worked diligently on this to get something that could pass the Senate, because it is Republican controlled, the House is Democrat controlled, and there's differences in what they both see out to be the final bill. Knowing that, I did say to my colleagues in the Senate Democratic side, look, this bill isn't perfect, but I'm allowing some give here, and so is Senator Stefano, for the House to add some protections that they might be necessary, that it would go back over to the Senate. If we don't agree, we'd have to do some kind of conference committee or whatever. But this bill has never been easy in the past 20 years. So first from inception, and then when we had to reauthorize it, and now here's another reauthorization. And it's never easy because the utility companies want something and the consumers want something else. And it's always about striking that balance. So I can go into some of the protections that we have now in Chapter 14, which I think are pretty, reasonable. For instance, since it all started with Philadelphia gas, we now allowed Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority to be part of Chapter 14. So we are expanding coverage because they needed it too. They're experiencing the same things with customers not paying, and then that balance on how you get those collectibles from people. We have a payment plan. It was we allowed 6 to 12 months more for individuals that needed more flexibility with their payment plans. Because what we had was you can pay a bill depending on your income level anywhere from 6 to 5 years, 6 months to 5 years. Some of the consumer advocates were saying, well, you really should extend it longer for people that are having serious poverty problems. And so we did that. We said, okay, we'll go from payment plans from 1 year to 6 years. Now, this is a far cry from, remember what I talked about 20 years ago when the PUC could have payment plans up to 75 years. People weren't alive after 75 years, so that debt was totally uncollectible. Here we're saying we need to collect that debt within 6 years instead of 5 years. We also did a lot with domestic violence because 10 years ago when we authorized, we expanded domestic violence protections to individuals, so they shouldn't be cut off from their utility service if they were experiencing domestic violence and had a protection from abuse order. But what we didn't do was recognize the out-of-state PFA orders. And now this bill that we're trying to reauthorize, 154, has that added protection for out-of-state PFA orders. We also have a reconnection fee credit added to this bill. It provides low-income customers who enroll in an assistance program. So say they're just not paying their bill, but they're not enrolled in an assistance program, so they're scheduled to pay their bills. We're saying if you're willing to start to pay in a payment plan, we'll give you some credits on your bill if you do that. So that'll help them, and give them more incentive to pay their bill. We extended the shutoffs, the notice period. Some consumers were saying, advocates were saying that we give 10 days now to give a customer notice on when they're going to be terminated if they're not paying their bill. We're now giving them 14 days. Consumer advocates have said that the 10 days is just not enough, that they need more, that a consumer should be more aware and have more time to prepare for that utility shutoff. Now, keep in mind, you can't shut them off in the wintertime. So this would kind of be in the spring, summer months where some advocates have said you shouldn't be able to shut them off in the summer either. But that was a non-starter for some of us, where then a lot of individuals would go 8 months without paying a utility bill. So how are you ever going to collect from them? And that was one of the sticking points that I think we've mostly figured out in Harrisburg, that if we had a summer moratorium, that would not pass in both chambers. So we're almost through with that one. And then there's the worker safety improvement, which was a sticking point. That's when you tell somebody that their service is going to be terminated, you would have to have an in-person contact knocking on the door to ensure that the person knew by personal contact that their utility service is going to be shut off. Well, a lot of utility companies have said that that's not safe anymore, knocking on doors. And I think we all kind of agree on that. So now what we said was we have to ensure that the final notices, the notices that people get, are clearly posted on the house or the renting facility. So, and it has to be clearly posted. It can't just be, off on the sidewalk somewhere. So these are some of the protections that we added. We also did some really good ones on the medical certifications. That means like if you have a medical emergency, you can go to your doctor and your doctor can sign a note and saying that you should not be shut off from paying your utility bill because you have a medical condition. We doubled that. Before you would have to ask the doctor 30 days he would give you, but then you'd have to go back and ask the doctor for another 30 days. Some said medical conditions last a lot longer than 30 days. So can we go back to the doctor after 60 days instead of 30 days? And that was reasonable. Most people agree with that. And of course, of the advance notice of the terminations is really important. So we did more, days involving that. And then what we did was to the electric companies say, look, you've got to do better coordination between the utility that you have and the state agencies to help eligible customers enroll in assistance programs. Because we know after 20 years that if a person enrolls in an assistance program, we know that they're probably going to pay their bill over time. Where if they're not in an assistance program, we're not getting any money from them, even though they're using the energy sources. So that's what Chapter 14 does, and now we're trying to do Act 129, which is a whole nother issue, but energy related. And this is so important right now because, as you've seen, the governor, the Republicans, Democrats, even nationally, they're talking energy policy. And the way we see it in Harrisburg is because the PUC has, warned us through their policy saying if how can I put this? If you don't reinstate Act 129, Chapter 14, then what happens is the PUC controls all this. It's just policy at their point. But the PUC also changes over time. It's a 5-member board, but sometimes we see it go down to 3 members, and then political games are played in which some of these protections that we're talking about in Chapter 14 can be all taken away. So we need to codify everything that I just talked about, and the legislature really needs to step up, and the PUC did say that. Now, PJM, the Pennsylvania New Jersey grid that monitors, and all of this, that's our grid, they have warned us that at the last auction, the rising prices, the capacity auction prices rose 800%. So what we're anticipating happening now is the electric rate increases for households could be anywhere from 10 to 20% moving forward. And for commercials, maybe up to 20%. And that's because of the last auction, the 2024 summer capacity auction. Even though Governor Shapiro has done things with PJM moving forward, we can't deny that we had that auction and the prices went up 100%, 800%. What that means is if people's utility bills across the board, and even commercial customers, if their bills are going up that high, there are going to be more and more individuals that aren't going to be able to pay their bills. We're going to see a spike in that. And unless we get a handle on how we're going to be able to get people to pay their bills, moving forward, it's not going to be pretty in the Commonwealth. First of all, it's not going to be nice when those electric bills go up. But then secondly, when we can't collect. So think about the customer that's been paying their bill their whole lifetime, right? The middle class families of the world that pay their utility bill on time every month, right? When more and more people don't pay, now your bill's going even higher, and now we're going to have to pay more for people that don't pay their bills. The situation is not going to be very helpful. So that's why Chapter 14 is so important to get codified into law and signed by the governor.
Why does Chapter 14 have to be reenacted every 10 years?
Because we sunset it every 10 years just to make sure that we can adapt to any changes over a 10-year period that the utilities see they might need or consumers might see. So, and in fact, funny you asked that, because in the bill, in Senate Bill 154, this Chapter 14 bill, I do not have a sunset in there. So it was sunset for the last 20 years, but I purposely let out the sunset because of being around this for 20 years. Every time we open up Chapter 14, the utilities want more and the consumers want more. And then we can't get to the middle and the common sense approach to it all, right? So I said, why don't we just not sunset it in 10 years? And if there's a real problem with Chapter 14 moving forward, then just have individual bills going out there to address the problem. It's one of the stickling points in the House. So I think the House is probably going to add in another sunset. So in 10 years, we'll have to revisit this again. I might not be around then, but I know, and I warn everybody because I've been around this. It's like you give the utility so much, you give the consumer so much, and then you have a deal, and all of a sudden somebody wants more, and it breaks the deal. So, we got to do this right, and I'm convinced we will. I know the governor is involved in getting Chapter 14 done. He's engaged because I think he knows that this is part of an energy policy solution that's necessary.
The last iteration of Chapter 14 expired in December of 2024. What has happened in the meantime until your bill moves forward and gets reenacted as law, particularly that these were colder winter months, January, February, March?
Right. So you can't shut them off. You can't. So the moratorium stays in place. The PUC held everything that we've done up to this point in place as their policy for now. They're just encouraging us to enact this because, like I said, the PUC can change at any given moment. There's no certainty unless there's actual legislation with the governor's signature to secure all this and make sure that it's 10 years of the same policy moving forward.
Are there certain segments of the population that are more vulnerable to utility shutoffs?
Well, sure. It's like, look, if somebody loses their job and they can no longer afford to pay their bill, we have to understand that. And none of us in Harrisburg disagree with there are some people that mothers raising children that they might have a job, but their job is only paying them $10 an hour. They're not going to be able to pay their utility bills, especially when bills are rising to the point that they are at this day and age, and they're going to continue to rise. So we understand that. However, we do know that there are people out there that are refusing to pay their utility bills. They're buying TVs, their smartphone, whatever they want as they see as their priority, and they're like, well, I'm not going to get shut off anyway, so why not pay this bill? And in fact, I think it was through PGW, they said they were so frustrated because there were so many customers out there that could pay that weren't paying. And the only way you can get those that can pay is to shut them off. Like you have to have a stick sometimes in order to get them to pay their bills. That's a shame, but it is a fact in this day and age. But it's with anything, when it's coming to paying for something, except for water. Most people don't want their water shut off. So it's something about the utilities that they think nobody's going to shut them off, so I'm just not going to pay my bill. It's kind of a shame because I do point out to them, don't have that mentality because if you're not paying your bills, somebody else is picking up that cost for you, and I don't think people really understand that concept as much as they should.
What advice would you give consumers who genuinely cannot pay their bills?
You need to really, call your EDC, your distribution supplier, because they can put you, they have various programs out there to enroll individuals in a payment plan. They want their customers to pay their bills. And the only way, like I've said before, is to get them early. Like if a customer knows that they're going to be in trouble soon, they need to call their EDC as quick as possible. And the PUC, has those options as well. So if you can get into a payment plan, they're willing to help you as much as possible. Go through with you. How much are you making a month? How much can you pay? Can we get you through this? Because we want them to pay their bills and we don't want to shut them off. Nobody wants to shut somebody off, especially in the winter months. And we don't want to shut them off in the summer either when it's extremely hot, but there's always that balance on we still have to provide electricity for everybody. And, somebody's got to pay for it. So we all have to share that pain of paying.
You'd mentioned your bill has already passed the Senate. When it went up for a vote, there were 7 Senate Democrats that voted against it. Can you talk a little bit about what additional provisions they wanted to see that did not make it into the bill?
I know that one of them was what I had talked about earlier was the sunset. So, Senator Stefano and I did not want to sunset this again because every 10 years it just becomes hard to negotiate. The I know, and then the summer moratorium was a big sticking point. A lot of individuals feel that there's older individuals that should not be shut off in the summer. However, I did point out that if you don't shut off in the winter and you don't shut off in the summer, that's a good 6 months or so where you're not paying a bill at all. So once that person gets into not paying a bill from 6 to 7 months, they're not going to be able, even in a payment plan, to pay their bill. And I think some lawmakers understand that, so that might be taken off the table. The other issue that's a sticking point is, remember how I said on medical certifications, we went from 30 days to 60 days, right? So that you can go and ask your doctor, 60 days after, not every 30 days. Well, it looks like the House wants 90 days. Some of the utility companies are thinking that's a little too much. They would rather go 30 to 60 days. The House wants 30 to 90 days. So therein, we might have to negotiate and maybe come up with something in between. So that's one. And then, yes, one of the other things that I really don't understand why, but the House seems to want the utilities to have to knock on that door. And I point out that even if they're knocking on the door, they're not answering the door. They know who's there, they're not answering it, and that's their way out. Well, I didn't know somebody was at my door. They didn't come knocking at my door. That's why I think it's more important to have it posted right there. We were there. We posted it. Now you know. So those are some of them. And but I think it's mostly on the medical that I think, and there's room to negotiate. And we did, Senator Stefano, I did leave room for them to negotiate. I think we can come to a final package, but I think the House has to recognize that the Senate is Republican and they're only going to go so far. I mean, some members that are extremely on one side, right, would love and say they shouldn't have to pay their bill at all. And we should, they shouldn't, they should never be shut off at all, right? And the other side's like, no, everybody should pay their bill, no matter what level of poverty they're at, which isn't right either. So we're trying to strike that balance. And then there was the other thing that the House wanted was no reconnection fees. And no security deposits. That was it. So you have to have a security deposits and you have to have reconnection fees because somebody has to come out to reconnect you once you were shut off. That costs money. And I'm like, well, why should I pay or you pay or a paying customer pay for somebody that didn't pay, was shut off, then reconnected? What we're thinking could be a compromise is maybe the reconnection fee being added to their monthly bill so that they have 1 year to 6 years to pay that off. So that isn't unreasonable. And the security deposits are necessary too, because if those security deposits, then somebody else is having to pay for a security deposit. So those are the real sticking points. And I'm hoping we could see through them. I am in the process of working with the executive director and the new chairman over in the House. So we will see. We haven't had a meeting yet because they're still getting up to speed. I've known Chapter 14 for 20 years, but they have not. And they're just delving into it now. And it is complicated. This isn't sexy stuff either. Like I always say in Harrisburg, everybody's like, why are we talking about Chapter 14? I'm like, it's important. But it's not like some of the other things in Harrisburg where you're talking about legalizing marijuana, you know what I mean? And a broader energy policy that people want to talk about. And this one seems to, their eyes glaze over when you talk about some of the things. And I'm sure that some of the people that are listening today are probably like, this is complicated. Well, sure it is, but it's important. And so I want them to get it right. So we're giving them some time to figure it out. I'm hoping by at least the time we do our budget, by the June 30th deadline, that we have something coming out of the House to negotiate with. I mean, that's the goal anyway.
Before we run out of time, we only have a few moments left, but since you did mention the state budget, Governor Shapiro unveiled his proposals in early February. What stands out to you the most, and what do you think has the biggest likelihood of moving forward?
Well, look, he talked a lot about energy, because we really have to build more capacity in the energy sector. We've taken a lot of baseload off, power plants offline, mostly coal and nuclear, but they haven't been replaced. But our energy needs keep growing because of databases and electrification. And unless we do something now to get more product on a grid, we're going to be in serious trouble. He recognized that, and that's why he introduced his lightning plan to help with permitting, get things to product quickly, and streamlining the whole process, which is great. But he also talked a lot about education, and it's so important. I mean, we have the Supreme Court ruling that just said we are funding education inequitably. And until we figure out how to do that and how to fund our education system so that more equitably, we're going to be dealing with this again and again in lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. We've known this for 20 some years, and the legislature just still doesn't want to move on the equity of it all. So that is just an important. And then the whole thing about how improving your economy. It's all about the economy and how to get businesses, coming to our districts, coming to our state, how to keep them here. And again, it's all about streamlining permitting. And he's done a great job at it. He's also done a great job when it comes to the professions that want their certificates right away and had to wait like 60 days and they couldn't get a job. And now it's like 3 days. And even the permitting process. He's also recognized that a lot of companies struggle, and especially in the energy sector, with Pennsylvania having so many municipalities that to get anything to pass statewide, you're probably going to need to figure out how not to bypass the municipality so much, but how do you streamline and get around some of that, and do it more regional approaches and county approaches to development. So I think he's done a really good job so far. He's very nonpartisan. He really is. He tries to work with both sides of the aisle. And I know that for a fact because both sides get mad at him at times. They do. They're like, well, is he a real Democrat? I'm like, yes, he is. But he does recognize that we have a Republican Senate and he has to work with them. And look, Republicans have great ideas. And so do Democrats. We just have to figure out the common sense approach to it all. And he talks about it all the time, get stuff done. And the only way you get it done is working together.
That's a good place to end. Unfortunately, Senator, we are out of time. We've been speaking with Senator Lisa Boscola. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Franz.